um, recording, but otherwise, welcome everyone. So I'm so glad to have you all here today. So I think we all have gotten some chance along the way to know each other, but we will do some intros anyway. I just want to kickstart and say, my name's Dr. Kevin Coopersmith. I was a graduate of the Organizational Leadership Doctorate Program for Cohort 3. And since graduating, I've published one article, I've presented at a conference, I've served in a chair in another, and written a couple articles or drafted some work along the way. And one of the big things that really drove me towards, wanting to see a space exist, not only for students of the doctorate program, but for alumni as well as anyone else that really needs the support, is to really just create a place that really acknowledges and celebrates first and foremost all the great work that everyone has done to get to the top of the mountaintop here and achieve their work or their goals, or for some of you in cohort 6 soon to achieve your goals, and ultimately just to create a space where we can all come together and ideally over time learn a little bit more from each other and from our experts regarding academic publishing, regarding this whole idea of academia, but also creating conversations around, what does it mean? Now that we, the vast majority of us either have our doctorate of organizational leadership or are about to get it, what does that mean when we want to turn back out as practitioners? Since day one of the program, we've had such a strong focus in saying that we are simultaneously growing as leaders and researchers. We have developed these dissertations, we've gained this competency in research, and we already have this unique ability as leaders, as change agents in our organization. And it's like, how do we synthesize all that? How do we take those skills that we learned in the dissertation, aside from, the ones that come naturally, the hardships that we face, the skill set that we build up just in being able to manage a project of that scope, but how do we take that and translate that into what we are? How do we take our dissertation and the research abilities that we have and move forward as effective academics, as effective change agents in our field, based on what we do and how we contribute? So this will be a kickstart of our conversation. We do have a panel here today, which will be leading a discussion of some points of advice. Our first hour will really be geared more towards our panel all sharing a little bit of insight in our own experiences. And then ultimately, the second hour will be really geared towards Q&A. So please write down any questions you have as you go along. Write down anything that may come to mind as you go, and be prepared to really just talk it out in the next hour. And just also know that today is really designed to start a conversation. That we do have our our LinkedIn group active to create that as an accountability space, and we will be holding several workshops like this over the rest of the academic year, ideally to just help everybody and support everybody. So the ideas that hopefully are forming in the conversations we have today, or even the ones that maybe you've had in the back burner since graduating or since preparing your dissertation, hopefully we're here to help incubate that over the next several months, to help you take it so that ideally you walk away from this not just feeling like, hey, that's nice to kind of feel a refresher about my dissertation and know what I can do with it, but that we can build a community within this cohort, not within this cohort, within our attendees, within all the cohorts through the LEAD program, to create a place where everybody can get some support, get some accountability, and get some direction in terms of how to develop those articles, so that one day we can really get our work out there, all share it with a greater degree than we have before, and really make those changes that we wanted to on a big level when we set out with our dissertations. So with all that said, I would like to just do a very brief roundtable for our attendees. We do have our panel all kind of set up at the top of the screen, and we can do the panel after, but if everybody just wants to go, I'm seeing them in a certain sequence, but you guys aren't. But Alicia, you're first up for me. So if you want to just go and just briefly introduce yourself, your cohort, and if you had anything on your mind today as we get started.
Okay, well, hello, everybody. Great to see some familiar faces. Really excited to be here, and thank you, Kevin, for organizing this. I am cohort 4. defended last April. My dissertation was around mentorship and corporate mentor programs and how they foster student self-efficacy, persistence, and kind of personal growth and goal development. I am the manager of the Career Success Office at Raritan Valley Community College, so I oversee that office and also oversee the internships and cooperative education and the mentor programs at the college too. So hello, everybody. Great to see you. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Rich, you're next up in my book.
Yeah, Rich Jankowski, cohort 6, working with Dr. Coopersmith to do a project on how volunteer leaders were affected in recruiting and retaining their volunteers during the VUCA experience of the 2020 to 2022 era.
Excellent. Welcome. And next, I wanted to give some thanks first and an introduction to my grad assistant this semester, Sherry Richardson, cohort 6, who has been a wonderful help in making this all happen today, from planning the event to promoting it and keeping everything going with social media. She's also going to be helping us out with our chat today. But with all that said, Sherry, take it away.
Hi. Thank you, first of all, for everyone for being here. It has been such a pleasure to be able to work with Dr. Coopersmith this semester. And just to see this come to fruition is just really awesome. I am a member of cohort 6 and excited to go into the next phase of our program. Finishing our coursework was exciting, and now really delving into the research component is exciting. And so to have this seminar over the next couple months is really going to be excellent preparation for us so that, once we finish up, we literally can hit the ground running. So I'm excited about it. Thank you all for being here, and I look forward to this event.
Absolutely. Welcome, Sherry. And Shirlene.
Oh, hi. It's like, oh, you got to me. Yeah, I'm actually second on my screen from you. So
yeah, I know. It's like
yeah. Okay. I'm Shirlene Henry James, and I'm part of cohort 4. And my dissertation was around the lack of African-American women in executive technology leadership positions in corporate America, because I'm an African-American woman in corporate America who's in IT. So it was very close to me and what I do in life. After doing this course though, and it was really interesting that, I went interviewed and I end up getting a executive leadership position in a financial tech company as a portfolio manager. So I was like, I don't know if I was interviewing better because I knew the right words to say or what I brought along with this course, because it did help me. And I'm really was interested in doing this because I'm looking at Black History Month, doing a talk for African-American women in technology for my company, because they're doing all sorts. So they're setting up speakers, and I volunteered to be a speaker based on my research. So it was interesting to go ahead and try to publish something before I do that. But so I was glad to see it, and glad to see some of my old cohort members who we haven't spoken to in a while. Thank you.
excellent and welcome. All right, Matt, you're up next.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Matt Roman. I'm part of cohort 6. I'm in the same class with Sherry and Rich, and just the same. Really looking forward to this seminar. As we're working on our dissertation and moving forward, and just kind of getting that journey going. My dissertation, I'm working around like the implementation. I'm the director of clinical education of the physical therapy program here at Stockton University. So I'm surrounding my dissertation around the implementation of clinical instructor education in entry-level physical therapy programs. And I'm interested to see how other schools across the country are also doing it, and, gauging how close are we in towards progress towards physical therapy excellence. Thank you.
Excellent. Welcome. Excuse me, Bob, you're up next.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Bob Heinrich. I also work at Stockton. I serve as the Vice President for Enrollment Management, and I was part of Cohort 1. My dissertation was around strategies to assist students who are at risk with early intervention to ensure persistence and retention. I appreciate, Kevin working on bringing everyone together for this, and I love the opportunity to remain connected, with all the other cohorts that have gone through the program. So looking forward to this.
Excellent. And Susan, you made it. I knew you said you weren't sure, so I'm glad to see you. How you doing?
Yes, I'm happy to be here. Thank you, Kevin. And thank you for organizing this. When I saw that Anthony was going to be a speaker, I just had to sign up for it. He's in my cohort, and congratulations, Anthony. And I also see Vince on here as well. Congratulations. I see a couple of my cohort members from cohort 5 who have actually defended and are officially have the EDD after their names. I am just about, hopefully, to defend. I actually just today received the approval on on the paper version. So now I have to really get into the throes of the defense. My dip is on retention and attrition of EDD students. So this hits home with probably everyone sitting around the table. And it also outlines support for a mentorship program within an EDD program. So I'm really excited to put my defense together and to go through that process very soon, hopefully, and really excited about tonight as well. Thank you.
Excellent. Welcome. And Bo, good to see you. How you doing?
Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Bo Yonker. I'm honored to be here and learn as much as I can. I am part of cohort 6, so I see many of my wonderful classmates here. I'm currently working with Dr. Gonsalves, and my dissertation is focusing on Black male mentorship within a fraternity, and really looking at the perceptions of those mentors and really trying to fill a big, huge research gap in regards to the efficacy of the programming that they've been implementing. So I'm very excited. I've been learning a lot, and I wish everybody, and congratulations to all those that have defended. Thank you.
Excellent. Welcome. Hey, Ed, how you doing? Good to see you.
I'm sorry, Kevin, was that for me?
Yes, you're up. Yeah.
Okay, it broke up a little bit.
No worries.
My name is Ed Cobbs. I'm a proud member of the Fantastic Four, cohort 4. And I defended my dissertation last December. And my dissertation was a case study examining the application and practices of transformational leadership theory in the workplace environment of the Delaware River Port Authority Police Department. I currently serve as its police chief, or chief of police. Kevin, when I saw your email, I was excited to see what you're trying to do here. And I'm always willing to learn from my fellow doctors. So I'm really appreciative of what we're going to do today and in the future. And again, thank you, everyone. And I'm glad to see some familiar faces. Thank you.
Absolutely. Welcome. And
before you move on, I'm going to give him his accolades because he won't say it, that he's the first African-American police chief in his county. So he's made one of that. So I was very proud to that he was able to do that after doing this course.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Charlene.
Absolutely. That's great. And unless my calendar's out of date, I believe our latest program doctorate is next, Dr. Ruiz.
Hey,
Vince,
Dr.
how you doing?
Coopersmith, how are you? I'm good. I'm good.
Good.
The Dr. Ruiz thing was kind of a shock to the system last Thursday night, right? Not that I didn't hope and anticipate and expect to hear it at some point, but it definitely shocks the system in a really, really joyous and celebratory way. There's a ton of relief with that as well. So my dissertation was on the onboarding and retention of licensed professionals in community mental health. I am a licensed professional counselor by trade. I have a small practice here in South Jersey. So I do consulting, meet with clients, do therapy, and I'm looking to publish, right, and do more writing and share more of what I think I know and some of the known knowns and the unknown unknowns that have come up along the way, and hopefully be able to gain some insight and perspective on how to go about doing that this evening. So that's it.
Excellent. Welcome. And Amanda, great to see you. How you doing?
I am in a joyous space right now with all these faces that are on my screen. Hi, my name is Amanda Copes, Dr. Amanda Copes. I defended last December. I am a member of cohort 3 and cohort 4. I did get to graduate with cohort 4, and I started my doctoral journey with cohort 3. So that is certainly a blessing for me. My dissertation was a qualitative study where I looked at self-accountability for competence in clinical supervision in speech language pathology. I'm a speech language pathologist. I work at Stockton. I run the speech and hearing clinic here. And I feel as though this entire whatever this is going to be, Kevin, is like plucked right out of my brain, because even after finishing, I always thought publishing was going to be on my soon to be horizon. And yet it's a year later, and Dr. G is probably very disappointed in me because I have not created anything for publication yet, as she shakes her head, but I will. So I'm so excited to be on this journey and to be part of this. And thank you for putting this together.
Excellent. Absolutely. So glad to see you, and so glad you're going to be along with us for this. So great. And Abu Saeed, how you doing today? Good to see you.
Yes, happy to see you. I'm sorry, my son behind me.
Oh, it's good to
My
have him
name is
here.
my name is Abu Saeed. I'm cohort 6 member, proud member with Sherry, Matt, Richard, Marianne, all of them. And I am cohort 6 member. I'm so happy because we are organizing this seminar for publication, because after finishing our doctorate degree, we have to look for publication, of course. My dissertation topic is like international effective non-profit organization, strategic leadership. I'm working under supervision of Dr. Sweet, and I work with all professors. I'm so proud, happy with working Stockton ED program. Thank you. Keep
Excellent.
looking for growth, keep looking for learning, keep looking for a good bonding.
Welcome. Thank you so much. And Marianne, how you doing tonight?
Good. Thank you, Dr. Coopersmith. Hello, everyone. I'm a member of cohort 6. Hi, all my cohort 6 friends. It's nice to see everyone. I'm working under Dr. Gonsalves right now, and my dissertation topic is in K-12 administrators, taking a look at authentic leadership, emotional intelligence, the professional standards, the readiness for taking over administrative roles, especially with the large turnover that we've seen due to the pandemic, and looking at what kind of opportunities there can be for teacher leaders in the future.
Excellent. Welcome, everybody. So Kristen and Elisha, I know you guys have your cameras off. So if you are able to join in and say hi, just feel free to pop in at any point. Otherwise, welcome. We're so happy to have everybody here. So, thanks everybody, first and foremost, for introducing yourselves. And, one of the things that was crossing my mind as everybody shared their own backgrounds is that, so much of the work that ideally we'll do together through tonight and through the Pathways to Publishing project will be about so many things that set the ground for this program to begin with, which was the idea that this program was always about a place of leaders from all types of backgrounds and understandings coming together and working to accomplish common goals and grow together. And although we've all completed that journey throughout our cohorts or are close to completing it, the big thing is this is another step for us with we have a new goal now, with understanding this world of academia, pursuing research, navigating this. And just the same, although we're coming to it with our own experience, our own background, our own challenges, we have a same community again. This is the same kind of group where we are all going to be working together to hold each other up ideally and provide a lot of support to drive everything and realize a shared dream of accomplishing these greater goals together. So thanks so much. I loved hearing from everybody. I do want to just shift the focus towards our panel just for a few minutes. And, you know, one of the goals with the panel was to not only highlight several content experts who will ideally be sharing their insight and advice to us as we go along, but also to have members of the panel that could represent the alumni experience from the doctorate program. So towards that end, myself and Dr. Anthony Dissen are going to be serving kind of as your alumni advisors on the panel today. We both have some experience with research. We have plans to move forward also with more, but ideally, you know, we can give a little bit of insight of what it's like in the in-between as you find these things out. So towards that away, Anthony, did you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, certainly. Hi, everyone. I'm Anthony Dissen. I am a faculty member here at Stockton University in the School of Health Sciences. I am a faculty both in our BS in Health Science program as well as our Masters of Public Health. I recently defended about 2 months ago as a member of Cohort 5. I've been in higher ed and academia for the last 7 or 8 years now, and I've had the opportunity to publish about 7 or 8 articles so far. Currently turning my dissertation into a manuscript for submission. And I also get the great opportunity to teach undergraduate students about the research process. So this is something I'm pretty passionate about and steeped in, and very happy to share any of my experiences or thoughts that I have with all who are interested in continuing into this area as well.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Anthony. And I'm just glad you're here too, and that we have such a great panel. And last but not least, I want to introduce them. And I want to give them a little bit of time because each one of our panelists do have some slides prepared that we'll fill out the rest of this hour with, just hearing from their advice and their own experience with academic research. So first we have Dr. John Young, adjunct instructor of organizational leadership, as well as a senior research fellow for student achievement partners. Then we have Dr. Sonia Gonsalves, who is a professor emeritus of psychology at Stockton University, as well as a dissertation chair, and Joy Jones, assistant professor, I'm mixing that up, but professor of business management at Stockton, as well as a dissertation chair as well. So Dr. Young, Dr. Gonsalves, Dr. Jones, if you want to each take a little bit of time to introduce yourselves, I'm going to switch over to screen share. I did have it set up so that for John first, and then Sonia, and then Joy, if that's okay for everybody with the slides.
Sure, that sounds good. So,
Okay.
Hi everybody. I've been an educational researcher my whole career, now more than 4 decades. As you heard Kevin mention, I'm the Senior Research Fellow with Student Achievement Partners, which is a consulting firm founded by developers of the Common Core standards. Prior roles I've held include, I was a professor in the Department of Educational Psychology at Rutgers for 17 years. I was also the director of the Higher Education Research Group at ETS, and the head of research for the International Baccalaureate Organization. In my career, I've published now more than 50 peer-reviewed publications, and I've given nearly 150 conference presentations. I'll share an example later, but my research on college admissions testing has been cited in briefs that have been submitted to the U.S. Supreme Court on cases regarding affirmative action in higher education. I've also served as a manuscript reviewer for numerous educational research journals, and I also served on the editorial board of the journal Educational Assessment. Let's see, the other thing I'll mention is my PhD is in educational research from Stanford University. So what I'd like to do is I've got some, just a few slides, and I just want to kind of give you some ideas about insights and things that I've, learned over my career that hopefully will help you. Okay, thanks, Kevin.
Great.
So the first thing I'll say is the good news is a good piece of research is publishable somewhere. The challenge, of course, is to figure out what's the right outlet for your work. And that is really the key, because what you're looking for is the right audience and a journal that's going to be interested in your work. Okay. So how do you go about doing that? Well, so the things to do is to, first of all, try to identify what are the top peer-reviewed journals in your field. And so some of the ways that you can identify that is, what are the leading organizations in your discipline, and to see if they sponsor journals. Another is, what are the journals that are heavily cited? One of the things you could do is go back and look at your own citations and see which journals you're citing. Another indicator of a good journal is one that has a low acceptance rate. And acceptance rates vary widely all over the place. Top journals in education and psychology will have acceptance rates that are in the low single digits. So, 5% is not uncommon. In other words, for every 20 papers they accept, 19 of them will get turned down because they have a limit on what they can publish. Another is to look at something called impact factor. So that's something you can look up, and all journals are basically, it's based on how much articles in those journals are being cited. So it's a quantitative measure of impact in the field. Another way is to ask senior colleagues in your field, what journals do they read? What are the ones that they think are important, the ones that they believe are credible, and so on. Okay, so I'm just going to put a couple of things in the chat. The first is, if you're not that familiar with peer review or the difference between peer-reviewed and non-peer-reviewed journal, here's kind of a good place you can go that'll help you understand a little bit about the peer review process and and what it is that reviewers look for. Okay, the other thing I want to help you to understand is something called predatory publishing. And there are journals that are credible in your field. There are also journals that are not credible. And so the term that's used for this is something called predatory publishing. The easiest way to figure out if a journal is a predatory publisher is one where you basically have to pay to get your paper published. Okay, low quality, low credibility, low standing in the field, and so on. One of the challenges is that these publishers are smart and they pick titles that are very similar sometimes to other journals that are credible. And so if you go to this link, you'll see that there are actually sources you can go to. Some libraries have done a good job of accumulating the names of different journals that are predatory publishers, and you basically want to avoid them at all costs because it won't help your career. It's not a good experience and not something that's helpful for you at all. Okay, so it's just something for you to be aware of. Kind of fits in with the idea about how do you find journals. Okay, so in educational research, which is where I publish my work, the leading journals are sponsored by the main Ed research organization, the American Educational Research Association. And one of them, for example, is the Review of Educational Research. I think if you had class with me, you might remember that I said that of all the Ed research journals in the world, this is actually the one that's the most widely cited. But one thing to understand is RER is not a journal that publishes original research. They publish literature reviews and meta-analyses. And that's actually one of the reasons why they're highly cited, because they're often the top quality reviews in their field. And so that's why they're cited as much as they are. Okay. Now, in terms of the actual process, every journal is going to give information that's pertinent for authors. Okay. It'll describe what the goal of the journal is, what are the kinds of publications they're interested in, the review process a little bit, the kinds of studies that they're interested in, and so on. So that's kind of a good place to start. And you can find this online for most journals. The other then is if you really want to get a better sense of, is this potentially a journal that might be interested in your work, is to look at some recent issues and see if they publish things that seem either similar in topic or similar in methodological approaches, right? Because all journals target specific audiences. And so the goal is to figure out, is this potentially going to be a group of researchers that are going to be interested in your work? So looking at just looking at the table of contents, reading the abstracts, will give you a sense of, is this going to be similar to the kind of work that I've done? Okay, the other thing I'll mention to you too is in terms of format, really make sure your manuscript meets the editorial guidelines, you know, whatever it says. You have to understand that editors get hundreds of manuscripts a year, and it's a huge production that they're involved in. And, you know, anything that doesn't conform to the guidelines is going to get sent back, you know, because it's too much of a management issue for them to deal with. And it also makes the job harder for a reviewer. Along the same lines, you might know that most journals have a limit to how many papers it can publish per year. And so one of the goals is actually write succinctly. Okay, I know that sometimes in your dissertation, you might repeat things you said in earlier chapters. No, succinctness truly is a virtue. Say something once, don't say it again unless you have a reason to say it a second time. Okay, and so, you know, writing in kind of a very succinct fashion really is kind of the way to go. Okay, the other thing to keep in mind too, Kevin, you can go to the next slide. The other thing to keep in mind too is that you have to think about who the audience is of the journal. Okay, so unlike a dissertation where, you know, you're writing to kind of a broader educated audience, a journal audience is going to be very specific, very knowledgeable. So you can assume much more prior knowledge on the basis of the readers than you would for your dissertation. Okay, which means you can cut out a lot of stuff. Okay, so imagine, for example, that, you know, in your dissertation, you're citing somebody whose leadership model you're using, right? Okay, and if that person reads that journal, you don't have to explain to them what their leadership model is, right? So I think that that's something for you to keep in mind, that you can assume a lot of prior knowledge on the part of the readership. Okay. Specifically, when it comes to your dissertation, publishing your dissertation is actually, in a lot of ways, it may not necessarily feel like it's actually one of the easier things that you can do, because you've got an intact document, and what you're doing is you're basically slimming it down so that you're pulling out the most important information and generating a manuscript from that, right? You've got a completed study, you've got a lengthy literature review. It's now really taking what is essentially, in most cases, a 100+ page document and reducing it down to something that's about 30 pages with the most important information, and then, you know, writing in succinct fashion and really focusing on what the key ideas are. Okay, so it's really kind of figuring out what can you eliminate, right? As a suggestion, if you're relatively new, ask friends and colleagues to review before you submit. It's always helpful to get feedback from folks, because they may spot things, and it's always good to have an outside person take a look for you. Okay, just really quickly, in terms of the review process, journal turnaround times is anywhere from about 6 to 12 weeks. And the way the process essentially works is the editor gets your manuscript. He or she will do a first review to see if it's appropriate for the journal. If it's not, they'll tell you right away, because, you know, you're not writing to the right audience, or the type of study you have may not be of interest to them. You'll find out pretty quickly, usually in about 2 weeks or so. Okay. Once the editor has done his or her review, he or she will then send out manuscripts to people who are experts in the topic. Okay, that's the whole nature of peer review. Okay, most people who do peer review are folks who are researchers like myself, often at universities. You don't get paid for doing this, but we do this as a contribution to the profession. Other people do reviews. We do it because that's how we advance our profession. Okay, and so it takes a little time, because it's often sent to multiple people. It could be 3 or 4 reviewers. Okay, and so it takes time for that to happen. So you might also wonder, how does the editor figure out who to send it to? Well, the editor has an editorial board, and he or she knows who the editorial board, the expertise, the subject matters that they're experts in. So he or she already has an existing board that they can turn to. It's also the case they can ask those folks, who might they suggest as potential reviewers? Okay. The other way is that what do they do if they're not sure of who to send it to? What they'll do is they'll look at see who you cited in your research, because you're citing other people's work because presumably they're the experts in this topic, and they'll look to see who you've cited in your references, and they might pick a reviewer that way. Okay. Just a little anecdote that actually happened to me once. I actually got a manuscript to review from the Journal of Econometrics, which is written by econometricians, right? And the reason it was sent to me was because these economists, I forget where they were doing cost-benefit analysis having to do with college admissions. And so they cited some of my studies, and the editor sent it to me. Okay. And again, it was just from looking at, he's an econometrician. He doesn't know who does work in this area, but since my work was cited, that's how he found me. Okay. The reviews, most journals do what's called a double-blind process. The reviewers don't know who the author of the manuscript is, and the author of the manuscript doesn't know who the reviewers are. Okay, and the idea is to ensure, basically a frank review of the paper. Okay, when the reviews come in, it's the editor's role to take all of the recommendations, send that back to the author, but also to make a decision about what the next steps are. Okay, next steps might be outright rejection. So that's the worst, right? Obviously, don't come back. We're not interested. Okay. The next would be revisions, right? You can resubmit with major revisions. So you'll get a bunch of suggestions about what to do, and you can resend it back, but it'll go back through review again. Okay. The most favorable that generally occurs is you can have revisions, minor revisions, and resubmission. And in many cases, if it's minor revisions, it won't have to go back for re-review again. And so the editor can make a final decision whether to accept it or not. Okay. The fourth, which I've never seen happen, is they'll accept it as is, which is like, we love it, it's perfect, but that that never happens. Okay. The last piece of advice I would give is you have to avoid duplication of manuscripts. And what that means is you cannot send the same paper to two different journals for review. You can send it to one. If it turns out they don't want to publish it, then you could send it to another one. But you cannot simultaneously send your journal to two different places for review. Okay. You also can't send a manuscript to something that's already been published either. One thing you can do with your dissertation, which is what I did with mine, is it is possible to generate more than one manuscript. So you might write a paper that's kind of more the empirical part of your study, so the actual study that was done, but you could potentially write a second paper talking perhaps about the policy implications of your work. Okay, so it is possible to generate multiple manuscripts from a larger study, but they can't be so similar that they look essentially the same, basically. Okay, and then I just have one other example I wanted to show you. We do, can I share my screen with you? Can I share my screen?
Let me stop sharing. You should be.
Thanks. So, we have lots of motivation for doing research. One of them, obviously, is we hope that we have an impact in whatever field that we're in. So, I think when you wrote your dissertations, you talked about the impact presentially of your findings on policy, on practice, things like that. And of course, publishing, in a well-respected journal is the way that you get your work seen, and that, hopefully your work has impact beyond kind of the smaller community that you're in. Another area is actually in, believe it or not, in legal decisions. I think you may know, last week, the US Supreme Court heard yet another case about affirmative action in higher education. It's a lawsuit filed against Harvard and also the University of North Carolina. You guys familiar with the lawsuit I'm talking about, right? It's whether affirmative action can be used in admissions, okay? So my early work in my career, which actually started with my dissertation, was actually on the validity of college admissions testing. And so because of that, my work actually gets cited by what are called, whoops, hold on a second. Let me do that again. Sorry about that. Let me do that again. Can you all see that? You'll see that. Okay. So what this is actually what's called an abacus brief. So individuals and organizations can submit information when there's a case before the US Supreme Court, and it's both to inform and influence the court's decision. So this is the current lawsuit that's in front of the court. Okay, this is the cover page. This is actually a brief that was submitted on behalf of the College Board, ACT, and some other organizations. And let me just page through. So I kind of like this. There's kind of a quaint, can you all see that? A quaint legalese term that's used called table of authorities. Okay, and let me just show you real quick. Can you all see that? Kind of in the middle of the page right there. Okay, so this is actually College Board research report I published, as you can see, in 2001. And, you know, even two decades later, this is apparently still cited as the definitive study about race differences in the predictive validity of the SATs. And I know that my report was cited in earlier court cases on the same topic. And, you know, as a researcher, you don't know who picks up your work and how they use it. For me, in this case, this is rather satisfying because I do believe in affirmative action. And so this is actually a brief that's submitted on behalf of the universities to continue to use affirmative action in their decisions. You know, we'll find out in June what happens, but, you know, you hope that, you know, as a researcher, your work has impact and it's picked up by folks. And this is an example of how that can be. Okay, you don't start out thinking that's what's going to happen because that's not your goal, but, you know, good work can influence what happens in lots of fields. Okay, all right. Okay, thanks. And of course, I'll stick around for Q&A later.
Excellent. Am I sharing the right screen? Are things moving along? No?
No.
All right.
It is. It's just, do you want me to share or do you, am I next?
Oh, I know what I did.
Slides, so I don't know
I
if you
have
want to
two
switch
screens
here.
and they both have the PowerPoint on it, like one below me, one in front. Okay. Great. Good save. Well, not really, but I did eventually save. So, Dr. Gonsalves, would you like to present?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I think I know everybody except the people in cohort 5. So greetings to cohort 5, at least except everyone in cohort 5. I know some of you. I am a Stockton emerita faculty, but I've been at Stockton for almost 30 years, teaching research design, statistical methods, advanced statistics. Like John, I am an educational psychologist with a PhD from Temple University. And I think we're going to say some of the same things, but I think the things that we're going to repeat bear repeating because they're important. And I want to start off by saying, Kevin, shift me to the other, that you are in a good position to write a research article. So John gave you the big picture and the important picture. I'm going to give you procedural issues and then take questions about them afterwards. I'm going to talk more about procedural approaches to transforming or converting parts of your dissertation into journal articles. But one of the things that John said that I can start right away piggybacking on is that you're not going to publish your dissertation. Nobody's going to do that. You're going to publish works based on your dissertation or aspects of the findings of your dissertation. But you're in a very good position. So I want to be positive and say you're well positioned because you've just done all of this literature work. This is a big part of writing about something in a scholarly way, finding out what other people have found and the limitations and the positive aspects of their work, and integrating that to position your work for scholarly dissemination. So you've done that. You've done that as you prepared your dissertation for defense. You have findings that contribute to a scholarly discussion, which is the key part of the article that you're going to write. It's about what you found and how you can set that finding in the context of the scholarly discussion on the topic that you are addressing, and your practice in research. So are you prepared to write an article? You absolutely are. You have done the grunt work that leads you up to preparing an article for publication. Knowing the literature is, for me, just such a big part, because everything that you think of writing about, you have to then start by reading what other people have done on that. That you've taken care of. You just have to do a review of your literature review. Kevin, could you move me along a bit? I'm mindful of the time. There are, however, very important differences between your dissertation and an article that you're submitting to a journal for publication. They're very, very different. So I've had calls from graduates who say, where can I publish my dissertation? That's not the question. The question is, what aspects of my dissertation can I transform into an article that will, contribute to the scholarly conversation about my topic? The only place to publish your dissertation is ProQuest, and that's a complicated thing. If you're in academia, you probably don't want to do that. But so the important distinctions between your dissertation and the article have to do with the purpose of, take me back a bit, Kevin, have to do with the purpose of the dissertation. For us, for the faculty of lead, we want you to show us so many things in the dissertation work. First of all, that you've mastered research design, that you have done this comprehensive literature review, that you have chosen the appropriate research approach to address these well-written research questions. All of these things we're looking for. But when you get out into the wider community, as John already gave you a heads up, they're assuming that you are practiced, that you're knowledgeable, and they don't want to hear why you chose to do a sequential mixed method design. You just want to get to the, so what did you find? How did you go about finding it? And how can you situate this in the wider research argument? So the purpose and the audience are different. The level of detail is different. We, by design, ask you to be reasonably repetitive in writing your dissertation, summarizing each section, then starting each new section with a reference to the section that preceded it. That is not the language of a research article. It is much more linear, it's much more compressed, it's much less repetitive. In fact, it's not repetitive at all. And the focus of both works, different focus. So in the journal article, the focus is, so what? What did you do? What did you find? Where does it fit? That's it. The focus of the dissertation is much broader. And we want you to demonstrate all these various steps and the connection between one chapter and the other and building on that. That doesn't happen. So it's not really cutting off a piece of your dissertation to publish. You really have to rework it in a way that's going to address a different audience with different level of detail and a different focus. Kevin? So these are the things that I just went through. Wide audience of academics who don't know you or your work. So you have to start up. It's a different voice. When you're writing your journal article, you want to find your voice, and not so much the voices of all others. And you want to find your voice quickly. It's a standalone entity, your article, so you don't need to think about sequencing from one chapter to the other. You just need to draw on the materials from your dissertation and answer the question, so what? What did you do? What did you find? Why is it important? And get to that quickly so that you establish your voice very early, and then be as clear and as condensed as the number of words would allow. Your competence in research methods is taken for granted. You don't have to explain why you did what or who said that that is the right. The extreme detail that we require is not going to be, there's no room for that in your journal article. Kevin, move me along, please. So this Halpern, and I don't know how to say the last name, said this in a recent article about transforming a dissertation chapter into a published article about the purpose. And I think this is really something that you want to think about, that the purpose of the dissertation is quite different. The purpose of the journal article is for you to make a contribution. So if I met you and asked you, what was the big finding from your dissertation? That's the one that you can say, what was the thing that you found out? What did your research lead you to discover? What did you find out when you did all of this work, years of work? What was the thing? I'm saying all of this because I asked a person from cohort 3, and her answer to me was, I don't even know. So you need to know that before you start going out to write an article. If you don't know what you found, then you're not going to have a strong voice. Selling that, as John told you, acceptance rates are very small. And if your voice isn't clear, then you're probably not likely to persuade the editors that you're going to make a contribution. So think about that. What contribution does your work make to the field in which you're doing research? And that is really the crux of starting it. Now, I am a firm believer in having more than one article from your dissertation, that you can write one about your primary findings. You can write one about unique methodological approaches. I don't know. There are different ways to craft more than one publication out of your dissertation, but you have to know what you want to say. You can't just go into chapter 3 and start flubbing around. Your first thing was, what am I trying to contribute? What do I want to say about my work? So, Kevin, so decide on the findings that you want to highlight, select the literature, the participant features, and emphasize that in your article. So it's not paring down your dissertation, it's reshaping it to tell the so what story. I did this, so what? So what did you find? How did you go about finding it? What were your limitations? How does this contribute? That's the big deal. So before I got this, I called my friend who is a journal editor, and she said, start with your lit review. She said, start there, look for the journals that you cited repeatedly in your study, and do some research on those journals. Look for the objective, what sort of work they publish, and then see where your work fits. When you look at the journals, the articles that you cited and the journals in which they were published, that's where she said you should start. And start looking at those journals. Read, go to their pages and read and see what sorts of work they publish. And then look at the editorial board and see, remember how John got cited by these psychometricians? See if you've read any of their work. See if there's anybody on the editorial board whose work you have cited, who you have used their work. Do their research interests align with your topic? That's what people want to know. Is this a good fit for a journal? So I think even if your work gets rejected, it's not that your work is bad, it's that it's not a good fit for this journal. So it's a point to grow on, and you take that and you go back to this step. Go back to your literature review step. Go back to looking at the journals and trying to see where it would be a better fit. In fact, sometimes the feedback you get from the editor is very useful in reframing how you resubmit your article. Even if they say it doesn't fit our journal because this, that, and the other, then that will help you to rearrange your work to submit it somewhere else. So I think I'm going to stop there because we're running out of talk time, and I will talk to you again in the Q&A.
Excellent, thank you. I really love in particular that idea of the starting with your literature review, because it came to mind for a couple reasons. Even not only is it such a great place to figure out where you're going and where you've been, but when I did that literature review again, specifically on topics related to vertical leadership development and responding to COVID, there were several, it had been over a year since I had done my dissertation. Now all of a sudden there are new articles to it. And so many of you did topics or developing topics now on very relevant ongoing research topics. Things, so many of us are looking at COVID through how it affects a specific organizations or leadership development in some way, or so many people are looking to things related to social or cultural change. And all these topics are constantly going on. And so one of the things that it felt like for me in that moment was I finished my dissertation. I did what almost everybody's done in some degree. I put it on ice, and it took me about a year before I was picking it back up again. And when I did, I was kind of blown away to see, wait a minute, those conversations have still been going on without me. I put my paper on ice, I put it aside, but now everybody else has been contributing and there's all these new published works. So not only was that a chance for me to reconnect and say, let me see articles that work with me, but I was really able to identify from there, where do I fit in this conversation now and how do I update my piece to be current? So that was a nice step, absolutely, for a lot of reasons. So thanks so much for that. And then Dr. Jones, I'll pass it over to you.
Kevin. So about 6 years ago, I took a family walk with my husband and my, at that time, 2-year-old son and our dog. And my husband and I kind of held back from my son and our dog so we could have a few minutes to talk. And I, at that moment, wished, as this picture says, I could clone myself. I get emotional talking about it because I was at Atlantic Cape Community College for 11 years, and I had earned tenure there. And with a small child, I decided that even though I had published there and I had presented at professional conferences, it wasn't part of the job at Atlantic Cape or at any community college. And I wanted to do more research. And so I decided to take a leap and apply for a position at Stockton. And at Atlantic Cape, I was in the School of Communication, and at Stockton, I was hired because while at Atlantic Cape over those 11 years, I worked to earn my PhD in organizational leadership. So I have a communication background and a leadership background. So I was hired as a faculty member in the School of Business within the management program because of my communication specialty. And I couldn't clone myself, but I remember that stress that I felt that day as I talked to my husband about, what have I done? I'm going to have to go through the tenure process again. And now I have this pressure to research, and I loved it. And now I have this pressure. And I can tell you that in May of this year, I earned tenure. And that's why Kevin doesn't know my title, because it doesn't officially go into effect until I don't become an official associate until September. But I did get through the process. And so I want to give you just a few tips for bridging the gap between theory and practice, which is so important to me. And taking that leap, because I can remember when I was in my doctoral program, lots of my colleagues and cohort members were publishing work we were doing in our courses, and I never thought mine was good enough. And then eventually, while I was at Atlantic Cape, I just thought I'll send this to a journal and I'll see. And then it started to become easier as I moved along with the process. So a few tips for you that may help you in this process, as you know, because you can't clone yourself either, and you're all working and you have families. First, it is important, you've done this work, that you get your work out there to be seen by others. And it does help add to your ethos and your credibility as a professional. So it is important, but it also helps, as I said on that title slide, to bridge the gap between theory and practice. You know, so many people will say it's just theoretical, but I want to show you a couple of examples quickly on how I've turned passions of mine. So I'm an interdisciplinary researcher. And because of my background in communication and leadership relate to everything, especially communication. And thankfully at Stockton, I have an opportunity to be an interdisciplinary researcher. You know, at some universities, I would have to be very fine-tuned into one area of research, but at Stockton, that's one of the things I love. I can research various areas. So here's an example. I developed a construct and introduced a construct into the literature on political communication apprehension. So what I talk about is that feeling you get when the politics discussion comes up and you get that anxiety and you want to just withdraw. And just maybe a month later, Susan Krauss-Whitborn, who's a neuroscientist, published a study, 5 ways to talk about those touchy areas of relationships in Psychology Today. And then eventually that got picked up and I did some media interviews related to this, where I could help people know how we can navigate those difficult conversations about politics when everything was so contentious. The second example I have is that I am very passionate because my husband was involved in a police shooting. And so I'm very passionate about the managerial communication process and supervisor support in phases of critical incidents in policing. So I published a study, Detective Casey in the 2010 shooting, which was a case study. And that originally came from a grant I got from the Case Center. And then that ended up moving into a support group that's now offered in Atlantic County to help officers who've been involved in critical incidents. And I'm moving on to do research. We're working on an experimental study with some criminal justice faculty members of mine. We're working on an experimental study to see how procedural justice and communication changes in traffic stops can improve the outcomes of traffic stops and help both officers and civilians or citizens. So anything that I can do with my work to bridge that gap is important. And I would encourage you to find ways to do the same, to find what you're passionate about and to turn or bridge that gap between theory and practice. The second is the pressure to publish can be daunting, especially combined with all those other responsibilities. A New York Times article in 2020 said that the pandemic put women back approximately 10 years in the workplace. And while I was working through the tenure process, I also decided to have another child. And that caused even more stress. In that same 2020 article, the researchers stated that, or they said that substantial research has shown that mothers pay a large career penalty. So for those of you who are mothers and you have children, sometimes it's difficult to balance. So I encourage you to find a network of support. We have the Fawn Writing Group here at Stockton. There are other support groups even within your cohort. Maybe you form a writing group within your cohort to keep yourselves accountable, because it can be difficult. The publishing process, and John said, or Dr. Young said 6 to 12 weeks. In a lot of our management journals, it can be much, much longer, unfortunately. I've been under the review process before for a year. It took from submission to publication a year and 2 months with one journal for me. And So I do want you to know that this process can be lengthy, especially when they're waiting on reviewers or they maybe been backed up, or, there are lots of factors depending on the journal. So I do have a resource here, and hopefully Kevin will send this out, that might be helpful. A few other quick tips. First, think outside the box or the education journal. So I said I'm an interdisciplinary researcher and I try to have a balanced portfolio. So I publish my work, even though it's related to leadership, it may be related to theology and leadership. I published something in Feminist Theology Journal, which is a journal published by Sage that focuses on genuine inclusion in leadership and Jesus crossing racial, cultural, and geographical barriers as praxis for leadership. So criminal justice journals, theology journals, qualitative research journals, leadership journals, communication journals, your work may fit in another area. Don't assume you only have one publication. Dr. Gonsalves said this as well. I can't agree more. Thankfully, mine turned into 2. And I don't think I would have known that had my dissertation chair not have encouraged me, just like Dr. Gonsalves just did you, to do that. And I wish maybe I would have tried to get 3 after hearing her wonderful presentation. So don't assume that it's just one. Familiarize yourself with the journal that you're going to submit to. I would encourage you to read current issues. And in addition to publishing standard research articles, consider publishing industry commentaries, media reviews, book reviews. And I'll give you an example. I'm going to give you some resources. And again, I'm going to ask Kevin if he can send this out to you. First, instead of maybe focusing on your dissertation first, maybe you want to just look into the process. So there is the journal, the International Journal of Gaming and Hospitality and Tourism. I serve on the editorial board. It comes from Stockton. Several Stockton faculty members are on the editorial board. There is going to be there's a call for student papers in that journal. So I wouldn't submit your best work there, not your dissertation, but if you have something you worked on as part of a course, you may want to submit that there just to start, because it is peer reviewed. And so you can learn a little bit about the process and the back and forth before you try to contribute your work to a higher ranked journal. And then consider co-authoring publications with an advisor or mentor who understands the process. This was vital to me. Again, my dissertation chair, Dr. Dale Fields, was absolutely wonderful, and it continues to support me. So lean on your chair as a mentor and advisor when possible, and maybe they're even interested in publishing something with you. Be aware of predatory journals. I'm going to skip that because Dr. Young did a great job discussing that. After cutting down your dissertation to approximately 30 pages, depending on the journal, hire an editor to review that work before submission. Edit 911, Mark, who owns that company, is a dear friend of mine, and he's wonderful, but sometimes I'll send him work and just ask, of course I pay him for the service, but it's worth it. But sometimes dissertations, even if you rework them, they still sound like dissertations when you submit them to a journal. So I would encourage you to get them edited even after you think you've got it where it needs to be. Present your work at peer-reviewed academic conferences, and I encourage you to do that even prior to submitting your work to a journal, because then you're going to get feedback from other scholars in your area. The Eastern Academy of Management, which is under the umbrella of the Academy of Management, it is a well-respected conference and organization or association. Their conference, I'm the track chair for the Management Education and Development track, and so of course I have to do some PR for this here. Kevin is involved with this organization as well, but they're a very friendly organization. You'll meet lots of people who want to co-author with you and give you advice and mentor you. And that conference, the submission deadline is in January. I think it's January 23rd. So as Dr. Young said, the first time that you submit something, it may not get accepted, but there's a place for your journal somewhere. And I do encourage you to get that work off of your desktop or laptop and get it published. And don't just stop at your dissertation. Go back and look at your coursework. See if you have an industry commentary there, because several journals will take those. See if you have a literature review or some other type of publication. And again, of course, I also suggest that you work on getting things published in those highly ranked journals as well. But sometimes maybe you need a boost of confidence as you're getting into this publishing process. And I am extremely passionate about this. Whenever I research with my students, my MBA student just published a case study, and I have an undergrad student that's working on something now. And so if you ever need anything, or if I can help in any way, I'm here, because I love to help people, because so many people help me through this process. So thank you very much. And thanks for inviting me, Kevin, to be part of this.
Excellent. Thanks so much. And I really love that Dr. Jones ended in mentioning the Eastern Academy of Management Conference, which is something you'll hear me mention a lot throughout the Pathways to Publishing initiative, because I kind of have a vision that many of us will be there in May, presenting, celebrating our work, coming together and really sharing our work at a huge scale. The Eastern Academy of Management Conference, like Dr. Jones kind of outlined, is coming to Philadelphia this coming May, which means it's right in the backyard for the majority of us. And it is an excellent first starting off point to present your work at an academic conference. That was my first experience earlier this year. It was absolutely wonderful. And now that thankfully they were up in Maine before, now they're local, and the submission deadline is I believe January 23rd, if I remember off the top of my head. That will be a big deadline as we think over the next couple months. And I'd like to invite any of you that are interested in presenting at a conference. It's a wonderful opportunity. A big reason that this Pathways to Publishing initiative exists is to support you guys through the journey of that as our deadline. I just didn't want to push, that big picture on you just yet, but that is our goal. And over the next 2 months, we're going to be offering a lot of resources in addition to additional workshops to support you all, and ideally find ways so that many of us can be present there and have that as a really culminating experience for the work that we do together over the next 6 or 7 months with this program. So with all that said, I do want to open things up to discussion with our panel. The next thing that I just want to mention this so that we can officially take it to 8. I was going to take a couple minutes at the end of the meeting today to allow you to fill out a brief survey. I am going to make that survey available now. It should pop up right on your Zoom. Right in your Zoom, in your June, I don't know what that is. But anyway, this survey, I just wanted to see what your perspectives were. My goal is that our next workshop, our December workshop, will be something a little more intensive and in person, or not. Well, I'd like it to be in person, but that's why I want to leave it up to you guys to call. But ideally, it'll be about 4 hours long. It'll be a longer seminar geared towards really taking a lot of what we've talked about today and put it into practice. So we'll be doing that sometime in December, but I just wanted to see what works best for everybody before we get rolling. Ideally, I'd like to do something in person, but I know scheduling's tough and locations are tough. So just if you could fill that out as things go along. I see a lot of activity in it, great as so far. But other than that, we can shift over to our Q&A. I would just ask that please use the hand raise feature, and that, we'll be taking questions for as long as we can up till 8 o'clock, and that I'll just do it based on first comes, first served. But we do have our panel and we are available for any questions that you have.
So I'll raise my hand if that's okay, Kevin.
Excellent. Yeah.
I'll start the ball rolling. All right. So as a total neophyte, total beginner here, what would you say is the very first step? So I am sitting down and I am thinking to myself, I am ready. I'm going to start the process right now at this moment. I've heard about looking at your literature review, looking at journals that speak to you in terms of what John talked about in terms of what we have cited the most. But how would you recommend to get us started and get us kind of ready? Is there something you would say, or any of the panel members they recommend?
Alicia, I would say, what story do you want to tell from your dissertation? What's the dissertation finding that you want to highlight, that you want to share? What is the big story? What is the big story of your findings? That will guide you to the journal. It will guide you to the area of the literature. I think that's what would drive me. What do you want to share?
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Sonia.
I would agree with that. I would also say, in addition, then is who wants to hear that message? Who would be most interested? And I think that will help you figure out what journals you want to look at. And then maybe looking at maybe some of the journals you cited in your literature review, things like that. That'll start to give you a sense of like, what are different journals publishing? And then it becomes more than those. I think those are the big questions. And then kind of going back to some of the advice from Sonia about how to do it, then would be kind of the next step. Okay, because until you figure out who you want to talk to, that will influence what you want to leave in. So that's it.
I'm going to jump off of that, John, for a second, if you don't mind. So my provost has been, kind of pushing me out of my comfort zone to present at a conference, and I'm petrified because it's just not something I've ever done before. So would you recommend, because I've heard, don't worry, you can present before you publish, should I kind of answer? These are two great questions. I'm looking down, sorry, because I'm taking copious notes. What story do I want to tell, and who wants to hear that message? Do I start to answer that and start to think about where I want to be published before I start to submit a proposal to potential places I might want to, present in terms of conferences? Like, which comes first there,
And Alicia, I think for the conferences, John's question comes first. What is the conference call like? You might have a story that doesn't match the conference call. Joy, sorry, I cut you off.
No, I think for you, Alicia, and there are lots of ways you can go with this, but I think for you, especially to understand the process before you start to submit to the journals that you're interested in, especially because I was there for your defense, and I think you could get your dissertation reworked into probably a couple of publications, and it's a good enough study, you could get it published in a higher ranked journal, or at least one of those studies could be. So what I would do is I would start working on figuring out, answer those two questions that Dr. Young and Dr. Gonsalves, and then figure out what story you want to tell with part of that dissertation, whichever piece. And then I would begin, though, not by submitting that to a journal. I would begin by submitting it to a conference.
Okay.
And the reason for that, whether it's the Academy of Management or an education conference or the Eastern Academy of Management, and there are some conferences that's what I was trying to say, like the Academy of Management is, they accept a very small percentage, and it is a really high profile conference, but it's probably not the best place to start. Eastern Academy of Management is a well-respected conference, but the people there are friendlier, in that they're not going to be trying to argue everything that you say, or, it's going to be a friendlier atmosphere. So if you found a conference, whatever that was, and whatever matches what Dr. Young said, your focus is and your story and what you're going to tell, I would submit it there, present it. And the reason I'm saying that is because then it's going to be peer reviewed. So you don't know if you get accepted or not, but you're going to get regardless reviews back on that article. And so you'll get feedback. If it does get accepted, you'll get more feedback, because when you present, especially if it's a conference that's a little more collegial, you'll get feedback even in your discussions. And you can also talk to people a little more about the process. Now, in saying that, that doesn't mean I don't think you need to be publishing something now too. I think you also, and I say this to everybody, go back. So that's one piece, is your dissertation. But I would go back and look at your coursework and see if is there any work that you completed during your coursework that may be quality enough to submit to a journal. And like Dr. Young said, maybe it's a literature review and there's a journal that will take that. I don't know because I don't teach your courses, I don't know what you took and what work you did, but if there's something that's quality enough you could submit somewhere, you could be doing that at the same time. Because I consider for you, your dissertation was strong enough. I consider that to be something you want to really craft and work on and make sure it gets in a high quality journal. And if you start there submitting it to a journal, you may not know what you're doing. I'll tell you all this because I learned this. The first article I published was in a highly ranked journal, but I just got lucky. I was at Atlantic Cape and my article was on feminist theology and how many feminist theology journals are there. I told people it got published in the best one, and then I said it's also the only one, but luckily it was highly ranked. But the second article, when I came to Stockton, I was so anxious to get something published that I had an article that was really great, and it could have been published in a higher ranked journal, and I just submitted it somewhere because I wanted that confidence boost. And then after that, I figured it out and started, I didn't do that anymore. But if I could go back, I would have taken that first article and I would have aimed for a higher journal. So that's why I'm saying I would consider that order.
Yeah.
Okay,
Alicia,
thank you.
I was going to mention a couple of other things too. You know, conference presentations and publications serve two very different purposes. So I think a little bit of it is, you know, what's your goal in doing that? Conference presentation, you know, you'll have a more limited audience, but it also gives you a chance for more immediate feedback. It also gives you a chance to meet people who are doing work that would be interested in what you're doing. So the professional networking opportunities is not to be minimized at a conference. Publication is what, you know, is what becomes permanent, so to speak. That's what people will see. And so I think a little bit is what your goal is. You start to get into a little bit of nuance. I don't know if the conferences that, you know, you would be involved in would have this, but let me give you an example. So the main professional organization I belong to is AERA. Okay. AERA has a requirement that any proposal you submit has to be on original work. You cannot have presented it at another conference. It also cannot already be published. Okay. So that kind of defines what you can do. When I was early in my career, so most conferences, you're required to write a conference paper if you get accepted. And that is kind of the perfect intermediate vehicle from there to take it to publication. So that's kind of, you know, if you're really efficient, that's really a good strategy. I'll put in the chat here. So, you know, so education research is my field. And it's kind of interesting what you said about presenting, because actually last month, 3 of the cohort 4 graduates actually presented at this conference. And I encouraged them, I helped them put together their proposal. Kevin was the chair, I was the discussant. But this might be something you're interested in. I don't remember the topic you're working on, but this is more kind of central what we think of as educational research. So a little bit of it is to figure out what is your professional identity going forward. Who might you be going? And with conferences, you would ideally, you're going to them regularly. You're not going to them once and you never go again. Ideally, you would go every year, kind of thing. So a little bit of it is, you know, who are the folks who are interested in your work and that whose work that you're interested in. Okay. This conference is in October. The call is in June. If you're interested, you know, you're certainly welcome to reach out to me for more information. It might also be helpful, Kevin, to the folks who presented last month to have them come and talk about their experience too, what it was like for them to present, because if this is a really new experience for you all, you might find that really, you know, really helpful and interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you, John.
Sure. Absolutely. And one last point I wanted to mention, Alicia, to your original question about what should I do first? My honest first advice, I think, for everybody here, as far as a great first step, just go back and read your dissertation again. And believe it or not, there are so many things in it that obviously you're the expert of. You understand it better than anyone else does, quite literally on the planet, for your dissertation. But after some time passes, we go from that point of, you know, being able to recite and defend every point to that, to like it almost feeling like a little bit further away. And picking that paper up, it's like riding a bike again, you know, and you will find, even in just a quick skim, just how much of it'll connect with you again. And to me, I think once you start feeling that spark again, once it starts feeling intuitive, it really does change. I think that's a process that happens with a lot of people that graduate with their dissertations. It happened with me, certainly, is that we put everything that we have of our very being into that paper, and then we finally defend, and then we're a doctor and it's amazing, but we go back to the rest of our life and we kind of create some space between us and that paper. And it's almost like when you think about it, you kind of start thinking of some of that anxiety again, some of that pressure, and you start almost naturally wanting to push it aside because it's daunting. But once you reconnect with it and pick it back up, you're like, wait a minute, this is the same extension of myself and my mind and my passions that it always has been. And it becomes all the more easier to connect a lot of the dots that we're talking about tonight, of really figuring out, what is those key points? What are the points that mattered the most to you? What do you really want to get out there in the world? What are the aspects of this that you want to build upon to create not only one paper, but multiple papers, multiple conference presentations, and ideally a point in your career where you're contributing greater to this conversation on an academic level across the board. So,
yeah. So first of all, thank you so much, Sonia, Joy, and John. I mean, the feedback, I'm just so appreciative. The other piece to this component, and I don't want to dominate the conversation, so I'll stop here, is that my work is original. I'm the architect to this mentorship program I created, and I think about trademarking, and I think about this publishing trade market, and then presenting. I've had other corporate organizations approach me to scale down and scale up the model. I've had other colleges approach me to imitate the model. So I'm just a little, just digesting it all, and you hit the nail on the head, Kevin. I defended, kind of was burnt out, and then kind of left it sit for a while. So yeah, a lot to digest. So I really appreciate this.
absolutely. And Shirlene, I saw you had your hand raised earlier.
Also, just following that, Dr. Coopersmith, we also do have a question in the chat from Princess. So once Charlene is done, we can address that one as well.
Perfect.
Okay. I did start at some point trying to publish. I did what you all said, actually. I took some journals from my literature review. I went online to see what they were looking for articles and how long and all those stuff, just to get it ready, to see what would I need to do to my dissertation to get it ready for these certain things. And I got stuck on all of them in the copyright section. They get complicated, like I needed an attorney to decipher what they were saying about paying copywriting or not copywriting, or they wanted to have copywriting rights to it. Or what should we do when we get to those sections around copywriting? Because some of them wanted to take control of the copywriting. Some wanted to, wanted to know what you wanted to do with and they give you options. And it's like, well, I don't know what to do with this. Do I need a copywriting attorney to decipher this information before publishing it out there and inadvertently giving rights to somebody else of my work,
Shirlene, so I've never had to use a copyright.
Yeah, but the journals were, in there, they said something, they all, if you go to their website.
This comes up if your paper gets accepted. Okay.
Yeah.
The copyright is owned, so the copyright is owned by the journal, not by you, but you're certainly allowed to use it. You can personally disseminate to whomever you want. Okay. The reason that the journal holds the copyright is because they're publishing your original work. And also, they're actually in a much better position to chase down somebody who's violating copyright than you would be. Okay, it's still your work, right? So it's just that they own the copyright to the publication. That's all it really is.
Yeah, but some of them talked about paying something for this. And
that sounds a little bit, that sounds a little bit
predatory.
Like
These were journals that were reputable.
I know, none
more
of the
than one
journals
talked about it. Okay,
I would check though.
Yeah.
That doesn't,
I'll
because
post them.
I've never had to pay.
Okay,
Charlene, they do ask for payment for open source.
okay,
Some open source journals were not predatory, will ask for payment to make your publication open source. So normal, if it's not open source, the people who subscribe to the journal are actually paying for the use of the work, for reading the work. If
Okay.
they make it open source, it's open to anybody who go on the web and click for it. And institutions often cover that cost. So if you get an article accepted to a reputable journal, and they always have open source as an option. You don't have to go open source, but if you want to, it means that it's outside the subscription payment agreement for the journal, and it's open access to anyone who has a computer. And no, I want to say normally, but maybe I shouldn't say that. In academic settings, the institutions often have a pocket of funds for open source publications that you apply to. And this would be not as Dr. Young has told you and warned us all repeatedly, not a predatory journal, but a reputable journal who has open source and subscription publication. Okay, so you want to look carefully and see if it's for open source.
I believe that's the term they used. I do believe that.
That doesn't mean they're bad people. It means that you would be circumventing the subscription process and making your work available broadly. There are benefits to that. You get cited more. If you go open source, anybody can find you, and even when you go in sort of Google Scholar, you'll be able to see your entire article. You get cited more, and that sort of bumps up your creds as a researcher. So it's an option.
Okay, thank you.
Wonderful. We have the question that said, I give presentations on my findings. How do I balance it with wanting to publish the same work? And Princess, you can clarify or elaborate if you need to.
No, I don't have anything more to add to that. I just, one of the things, I do have something to add to it. One of the things is that I didn't allow people to record it. And so I didn't know if that meant anything, but I didn't want them to use it and share with anyone else because I eventually want to make some money. So that was something that was important to me, and I wanted to know how that may affect my ability to publish this work later if I have given presentations.
It doesn't. So I speak, that's, a business where I speak professionally, and I speak on topics related. So for instance, my dissertation was on several contextual variables and motivation to lead. So a lot of times when I present, I talk about factors that impact an individual's motivation to lead within an organization. And I do cite my research, like I'll say I conducted a study in this year. So just like you'd cite somebody else, but I published it. In other words, so if it's an academic conference, here's the distinction. If it's a peer-reviewed academic conference, like Dr. Young was talking about, so if it goes through reviewers and it's an academic conference presented by an academic association or organization or university, once it's published, you cannot present at that conference. Or every academic conference I've ever been to even makes you click a box saying this has not been previously published. So that's why you always want to present academic work first before it's been published. If you're talking about practitioner speaking, like maybe you use some of that information in your consulting or keynote speaking, that's a different ballgame because that's separating the academic world and the practitioner world. So you can present your findings and you can even say, I conducted a study and this is what I found, or you can use it interactively in a practitioner world or for consulting. And that's not, as far as I know, I've never thought that was a conflict of interest. I do cite that I conducted the study, but that also helps your credibility because you conducted the study, it's original research. So I don't know
Thank
if
you.
anybody
Thank
else.
you.
Princess, you're actually touching on a slightly different issue, which is about the possibility of commercializing what you've done. So, at a minimum, you can look into copywriting or trademarking what you've done. And if you're going to go somewhere even further than that, then you probably need to consult an attorney, because now we're talking about protecting intellectual property, things like that, and you have to kind of figure out how to do that. And so I think until you've done that, I think you do have to be mindful of like what you're sharing with different audiences and things like that. Okay. And this is not an uncommon thing. I mean, academic research often does lead to commercial products, right? I mean, a lot of major research universities have technology transfer departments that deal with this. If research is done by a faculty member at a university, who then owns the product that comes forward, for example. So this is common, but it's something that you're now it's a slightly different issue that you're talking about here. Okay. And yeah, so just something for you to think about if you want to take what you've done and to create, a commercial product from it.
Thank you, because I do want to publish a book on it also. So I want to make money. So, okay, thanks.
Well, if you want to publish, you might want to look up, there's a book called Why People Stay, and it's Dr. Angela Springer, and I can put her name in the chat. The reason I'm saying this is it's a short book. She was in my cohort in my doctoral program, but she turned her dissertation into a book, and it is wonderful. I use it sometimes in my MBA classes, but it's called Why People Stay. So instead of publishing peer-reviewed scholarly articles, she turned hers into a book. Mine, I don't know who would want to read that book, but I think mine's a little on the dry theoretical side, but hers was really, she just recrafted it into more of a practitioner based. So I'm glad Dr. Young said that to clarify, because if you want to publish that, you might consider a book publication if that's what you want to do, turning your dissertation into a book. So I'll put her name in the chat, and then you might look up what she did with her it is a dissertation, and she just reworked it to make it more commercial, but it is directly from her dissertation. So I'm going to put it in the chat for you.
Excellent. Anyone else? Any other questions? Any thoughts that are coming to mind?
I do. I'm kind of just having a hard time getting started. So when you were talking about rereading, your dissertation again, do you have any suggestions for kind of like how to thought dump what you might want to do, as you're reading, what kinds of, maybe I want to publish, like, this was great with my methodology, or, how do you organize those particular stories you might want to tell? That makes sense.
It makes sense to me, because I still remember your dissertation and I still reference it so often as a model of how to do qualitative work well. So a lot of people do qualitative work, but they don't abstract to the level that you do. And I think that is the quality of qualitative research. And I think you have stellar work on your hands. I totally appreciate backing away from it for a while and just let it percolate. But I think it's time to come back and to address you specifically, Amanda. I think you should just open up your computer and talk about the story. Think of 3 stories your dissertation can tell, and don't write them down, just talk them in Zoom. Start a meeting with yourself and say, one of the first things I think I would like to share is this, and just do a short synopsis, do each of them, and then listen to them again. And then you know what you should do next? Call your chair
Thank you, Sonia. And thank you for that, all of that. Thank you.
I think what I would comment on as far as getting started and really just divvying out your work, in addition to that kind of reconnecting to your research, it's also kind of about thinking, you know, dialing back to what it was that you wanted to say to begin with. You know, like before you did your study, before you really even drafted your chapters or anything, what was it that you were really trying to get out there in the world with your dissertation? And I think sometimes refocusing on that goal and knowing, well, I wanted to contribute to these conversations right off the bat, that was a big thing that helped shape me. Was I knew first and foremost that my dissertation was about personal development planning in a VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And I knew right from the start that the big things that I had to talk about were leadership development during uncertain times. And I had done a lot of vertical leadership development as a driving theory and driving concept in my literature, but I knew that wasn't really the place for that article. Although it had driven so much of the first article that I wrote, I knew I wanted to be at a forefront with vertical leadership development in my research, but I knew that wasn't the role of it in that article. I knew that if I wanted to bring anything forward first, I needed to first kind of recenter myself in a lot of ways. So my first article was really a summary, kind of just recapping things, those big bullet points of what my dissertation was about. And I knew I had that itch to say, well, I want to add to better conversations in vertical leadership development, but I knew it wasn't quite the time yet for it either. I knew that that was more like a second article or a third article for me, just in the way that everything fell. The big takeaways from my dissertation were more about how leaders learn across all boundaries and all backgrounds. And so that's what I did my first article on. But I knew that I would never be happy with the dissertation and with any academic efforts with it if I wasn't also saying my research is able to take vertical leadership development forward, even a little bit, even just a slight contribution to that conversation. And so my second article was all about now boiling my results and my findings down and looking at it through more vertical leadership development lenses. And that's kind of like what I talked about earlier, when I really started connecting with new literature on the topic and when I started kind of looking at my findings through new lights. And that's really one of the bigger scopes of these kinds of articles, is that when you look at turning your dissertation into one article, that's usually fairly easy, when at least to conceptualize. But the second or third, or maybe even potentially fourth, if you can stretch it that far, but I mean, that's pretty far, is really about what are the main conversation points that I want to add to? How do I really want this research to matter to people? And what are those big headlines? You know, everything in publishing, whether it's this context that we're talking about now, whether it's nonfiction work, whether it's fiction, all of it boils down to these kinds of elevator pitches that we've been talking about. Those high level views, you know, of how are you going to share your insight in the most simple manner to the most amount of people. And towards that end, when you're really feeling like you're reaching a point of comfort with your article topic or your multiple articles, you should really feel like it's something concise. And you should be able to say something simple along the lines of, at least in my case, my first article helped to summarize and recap my main key findings to a larger audience. My second article really looked at the vertical leadership development components. And I know when the time comes for me to write my third article, which hopefully that'll be my own accountability gain for this group, it'll be about taking vertical leadership development and taking it into the bigger conversation of personal development planning. And all those things are tenets from my data, from my literature review, that are all connected to what I've done and really to what I've already written. But it's just about giving life to it again and contextualizing it in the right way and getting it into this new venue that is scholarly writing and writing articles.
Amanda, what I would add is, you know, it sounds like you've got some significant findings from your study, from your dissertation. And I think the question you want to answer is, you know, what do you want to share with colleagues in your field? what would you want them to know, as a result of doing this? How has what you've done helped advance knowledge in your discipline? And I would kind of go from there. Okay. I want to also go back to a point Kevin made, which is a good one, about additional articles. Another way, if you've got a large enough data set, is do additional analyses on the data you've got. If you've got a data set where you've not exhausted all the analyses you could do additional things that could be of interest, then that could lead you to another publication. If you can't do it here, then it's kind of, maybe advice for the future. The next time, if you're involved in a study, collect enough data so that you can lead to multiple publications. That actually is the strategy.
I would like to hear from Anthony about tips, advice, process, product. Just hear from
Certainly. Thank you, Sonia. So in my field, the one thing I'll just share is that in public health in particular, since we're such an interdisciplinary field, it's rare that research is done and published with a sole author. Certainly not unheard of, but very often work is done as part of an interprofessional team. And so, and I know other people had mentioned this before, but especially for those that are new to research and academic and scholarly writing, aligning yourself with an interprofessional team, especially those who are more seasoned scholars or professionals in your respective field, would be quite valuable, because they can help personally mentor and guide through the writing process. They can help to identify other areas, like John was just saying, about other forms of analyses that may not have been related to your dissertation research questions, but now that you are not limited by just the research questions posed in your study, you can do so much more with the data that's available there. And the other thing is that if you can align yourself with other professionals, it leads to future research, because ideally this wouldn't just be the only publication you ever do in your career, that this would be the launching pad. So for example, there's a team that I'm on that's based in researchers in both Poland and Spain. And I'm on writing an article with them right now that's under review, but they just found out about another study I'm doing. And now they want to take the instruments I'm using and do Polish and Spanish versions of them. So now we're going to be doing testing and validity to make sure that the translation into these other languages is still a valid research tool to use. So this will lead to years of research and collaboration amongst the 5 or 6 of us that are on this team. So especially starting off new, I would just encourage everybody to not feel that it is a solely solo act, that while the dissertation writing experience is ultimately your written work, that you can collaborate now and you can work with other people to not only work on the actual dissemination of the data, but also to work with people who are building your skill sets. I have a conversation last evening with a student actually in Australia who's interested in going into higher ed as opposed to going into clinical work. And one of the things that was holding him back was a fear that he didn't possess very strong statistics skills. And what calmed him was to realize, well, oftentimes, the areas that your strengths are what you bring to a research team, and then somebody else who's maybe the statistician for the team purely does the statistical analysis, and everybody else writes up the meanings of it. So again, I just want to emphasize the idea of interprofessional collaboration with this current or any future research or scholarly writing, because it does ease some of the work. I know in some fields it's typically done more solo research versus others, but for anything that I can share from the public health field, we regularly work with each other, which makes the process that much easier. And the only other thing I'll share is that the peer review process is nothing to be afraid of. I feel like it's given much more of a negative aura than it requires or deserves, that it's people are there to provide insight. And in the articles that I've had published previously, every peer review, even in the journals that ultimately may have rejected a particular manuscript because it wasn't a good fit, made my manuscript submission to the next journal that much stronger, because they really do give good feedback. And so it's not, even rejection's not rejection, it's just finding that right match, and to take the feedback that's given as an act of betterment. And I've had people email me about articles that I've written where they either enjoyed parts of it or they had questions or critiques as part of it. And that's just part of the academic writing world, is that it is meant to be a dialogue, an ongoing dialogue.
I want to echo what Anthony said and also elaborate. I had someone say to me recently, a doctoral student say something about co-authoring with your chair. And because I had said something about my chair, who is and was wonderful. I mean, and he very early on got me to present at the Irish Academy of Management. And I was at Atlantic Cape and had no plans at that time to ever go to a four-year university. I was happy. And he said, let's present there. And so we did. And then he said, let's write this book chapter together. So we did. And then we published an article. And the student I was talking to said, so basically you did all the work and he got a publication. And I said, no, not at all. In fact, yes, I did a lot of work, and he gave me first author and he was second author. But the amount of wisdom I gained from working with him through that process, and even knowing what conferences to present to and how to present, how to submit, and how to, this discussion we're having about how to submit to a journal and where to submit, I would have never gained that knowledge if he hadn't mentored me through that process. So if you get a chance at some point to publish something, like Anthony said, with a colleague who's maybe, been publishing longer, researching longer, or your dissertation chair or an advisor, go for it, because that's just a wonderful experience. I will say though, I have to add the alternative. I at one point thought that I was going to uplift myself by working with two prolific researchers in the area of communication apprehension. And boy, did I learn quickly. Just because someone's published a lot doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be that great to work with, because in this case, they had so many other projects going on that a lot of it fell to me, even though, and even now we're trying to get it published, and it's been a little, so I say this because you're going to get those experiences too. You're going to work with people sometimes, and you're going to have wonderful experiences and figure out who you work well with. And then maybe sometimes you're going to co-author with someone who ends up not doing much of the work, just like that group project back in college. So I just wanted to tell you both sides of the spectrum. Hopefully, Anthony, you haven't had that experience. Mine should not have been that way. One is at Texas Tech and the other is at New Paltz State University of New York, but they're both toward the end of their careers. And so they didn't have as much desire or motivation to publish this. So it's been a lot of motivation on my part to get us done. So I just want to tell you that can happen too.
Excellent. Well, 8 o'clock is swiftly approaching. Do we have one last really pressing question, or do we want to do last bits of advice from the panel?
There was one final question that popped in the chat.
Oh,
that said,
perfect.
Can you provide more information about grants available for research? Are they available through universities and foundations only generally?
I can talk about that a little bit. Princess, if you're looking for support for your work, my suggestion would be to find a philanthropy that's interested in your topic and perhaps supporting, who you might want to work with. Research grants is a whole other, set of activities. They're extremely competitive, and most of the time you have to have an institutional affiliation, because research grants go not to individuals, but they go to the institution. So here's an example. This is a Spencer Foundation, which funds a lot of work in research. One thing for you to know is that applications for research grants are actually not reviewed blindly. So that's actually one of the differences. And so, I've served on grant proposal review committees for both the National Science Foundation and the Institute of Education Sciences. And so we want to see, what have you done before? I want to see your Vita, because you're going to be competing against, other people for the same pot of money. And again, same thing. Funding is 5 to 10% of proposals get funded. So let me give an example. If you are applying for funding to a research grant, think about who you cited as the most important person in your field, in your dissertation. That person could be submitting a research grant to the same organization. So you'd be competing directly against other people in your field. And so I think realistically, you're more likely, if you can find a philanthropy, that is a much more, I think, fruitful way for you to go.
Thank you very much.
The other thing I'll add is that's kind of one of the differences between, so, again, as you heard me say, I was a faculty member at Rutgers. Rutgers is a research institution, and, research institutions are just completely set up to do that. I mean, the Research Grants and Administration's office at a place like Rutgers is dozens of people, because faculty, including myself, I mean, we're expected to bring in funding to fund our research. And that's part of what's involved in the promotion process for faculty members. So, getting multi-million-dollar research grants is a goal. And so that's who you'll be competing against if you apply for research funding.
Excellent. We are just about at 8 o'clock. I do just want to take a minute to direct everybody's attention to the chat where Sherry just posted a link to our LinkedIn group. I do want to, say that, while today was an excellent first start, our LinkedIn group is going to be our main hub to drive some traffic and some conversations between now and when we get together in December. So please join us. Please stay connected on there. Please feel free to post any questions, comments, concerns. I'd really invite anybody who really is big on accountability. Post a goal for yourself in that group, make it so. We'll hold you accountable. We'll push you through. We'll give any support you can. There is, with what you have all accomplished individually and as a community, there is nothing, honestly, nothing that I believe that the people in this group aren't capable of, less alone navigating how to take your dissertation and translate it into this process. You have the support. We're going to give it to you every step of the way. And I just want to say from the depths of my heart, thank you so much for coming. This was such a wonderful conversation. And thank you so much to our panelists for joining us tonight. Feel free, keep in touch, join us on our group. Let me know, feel free to reach out to any of us for any more questions, and get to writing, get good work, everybody. Now, only all that's left is to do it, and we will be supporting you every step of the way. So thank you so much, everybody. Excellent job today. Thanks so much for all of you to show up, to present, to communicate, to ask questions. And I look forward to so much working with you guys over the next couple months and seeing those finished products once we get it out in the world. Thanks, everybody.
Good
Have
to
a
see
great
you all.
night.
Have a good night.
Kevin, this was great.
care.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks
for
so much.
being part of
Bye-bye.
it. Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Thank
It
you,
was a
everybody.
wonderful
Have a
time.
good
Take care,
night.
everybody.